Dr. Joey Hulbert is a postdoctoral research associate at Washington State University. He has a background in forest pathology, and he is passionate about public engagement in science. With the help of many incredible partners and collaborators, Joey established the Forest Health Watch in 2020. His initiative to lead this program stems from his experience establishing Cape Citizen Science Program in South Africa during his doctoral program. We also have Nina Avila with us here. Nina is the Education Programs Director for Hoyt Arboretum Friends in Portland, Oregon. She supports connecting people of all ages with trees through a variety of programs, activities, and events. Nina's experiences at botanical gardens and parks, where she supports connecting people of all ages with trees. She's been working in the field of environmental education for 20 years, and her roles have supported informal science education programs at botanical gardens, arboreta, and regional park systems across the country. With that, I will turn it over to you, Joey and Nina. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, excellent. Great to be here. Thanks so much. We're really pleased to be here. It's nice to be sharing this opportunity with Nina as well. And so I'm going to take the role first and share some kind of summaries of community science and how we're using it for forest health research. But I do want to welcome Nina to say hello before we get started. Hi, thanks for being here with me, Nina.
Hi, Joey. Hey, everyone in APGA world. Thanks for joining us today. Yeah, Joey's going to get started, and then I'll jump in a little bit and tell you more about our project at Hoyt Arboretum. And apologies for my voice. I hope everyone can hear me okay. This is not my normal sound. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Okay, great. We do want to just kind of acknowledge where we're coming from and share with you today. And I'm not entirely sure if you can see my mouse. Is that probably not, huh? Yeah. Well, anyway, today I'm coming to you from the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians, kind of in Tacoma, Washington, and Nina is joining us from greater Portland area, kind of traditional homelands of the Cowlitz and the Clackamas, and a couple other bands like the Kalapuya. And we're just really pleased to be coming to you from kind of the lands of the conifers in the great Northwest. And we have had this extreme privilege to get to love and fall in love with the Northwest. And we're thrilled to be able to share some of that love with you today. So in terms of community science today, we're going to highlight a few different approaches. And what's really neat today is I'll talk a bit about one approach that we've been using. And then Nina will share another approach that we've been using to tackle kind of the same issue in terms of forest health, and we'll introduce that soon. We also want to talk a bit about the different tools available for you to use in your garden if you're interested in engaging members of your community or volunteers or your own staff in some of these research projects. And we'll introduce the Forest Health Watch project, kind of the research that we're collaborating with Nina on, and she'll have some opportunity to share a bit about their programming at Hoyt Arboretum. And then we wanted to kind of wrap up with some summaries and some ideas of projects that could be done in other gardens and some places that we'd like to go together. So pretty thrilled to be here. This is a photo of an individual in Tacoma named Jim. He's an incredible community scientist in our program, and you know, he's been really one of the top kind of contributors, but he's also shared a lot with us and helped us shape other programs and other research questions. So in many ways, we're advancing knowledge together, but we're also learning together. Like, I'm learning from him. You know, I'd love to share with you some of the research projects that we've done that he's basically brought to the table with his own interest. But overall, we think about community science as a lot more than volunteering. We're trying to build programming and opportunities where there's shared perspective. We want to build programming where we're creating shared understanding around certain issues, and we're learning together. And so it's really a two-way opportunity, or we try to build the programming in that way, so that we're learning together and advancing knowledge at the same time. In some cases, there may be a problem that you identify with the community, and I think when that's the case, that tends to be the most powerful community science projects you can have, because there's a lot of intrinsic interest in the project to begin with. And I did want to highlight this study from Dr. Frazel, that I had the super privileged to be included on, but it's a really great paper in Nature Reviews that summarizes kind of citizen science, or community science, if you will, in this role in ecological and environmental sciences. And I really like this diagram on the bottom right, where the first stage of this is what I just mentioned, where you identify a problem with the community. And then when you have that problem in mind, you determine if citizen science is actually a feasible approach. And from there, if so, then you work to start designing the project and building community around it and collecting the data, and then finally doing some evaluation. And today we're going to share with you a specific project and an issue in the Northwest that's kind of the reason we built this Forest Health Watch project, and the reason it was the first project of the kind of broader program. So before we get to the specific project that Nina and I have worked on together in the Northwest, we still want to just summarize kind of the different types of approaches you could use for building community science programming in the Northwest, or excuse me, in your garden. One approach is this type of approach, which we consider like mass participation, where anyone can participate without any formal training. And this is great if you're trying to collect data over a broad scale, like we have in the Northwest, where we've kind of reached communities, ranging from our friends joining us today in Vancouver and Victoria, all the way down to where Nina is in Portland. The other alternative that Nina's going to share a little bit about is this more trained participation. And so in this case, you're actually training a cohort of volunteers or participants. They go through rigorous training, and then that cohort is the team that's collecting the data. It's not really open to everyone, but you can do a lot more powerful research in that way sometimes. For example, Nina will share with you kind of how we engage some volunteers in an actual hypothesis test using that method. Another approach, sometimes I refer to it as passive surveillance, but it's really like biodiversity monitoring. So in this case, it's an observation on iNaturalist where someone shared an invasive insect, and they may not have known it was an invasive insect. But in that case, it's an opportunity to kind of surveil what's happening and what people are seeing out in nature and or their own cities or your gardens. You might find the first spotted lanternfly in California on iNaturalist. You don't know until you start looking. This other approach is a little bit different. This is kind of an approach where you may set it up so individuals are contributing to project curation or enhancing data quality on some of these tools. And so again, this is iNaturalist, which I'm going to talk about in a minute when we get into the tools. But there's one of the powerful things about this is the community. And here there's a ton of dedicated individuals that help people identify organisms they add. And so I want to share this example of Drew Meyer. So he's a kind of an amateur. I think he sort of identifies as a birder, but really is just passionate about all biodiversity. And he has identified more than 67,000 observations on iNaturalist. So he's kind of just this unsung hero. And I'm really, really am grateful for individuals like Drew because they really help us maintain the quality of data that's shared in some of these tools like iNaturalist, where it takes multiple people to agree that they identified that organism correctly. And I like this paper that kind of summarizes the benefits of that approach of engaging as a community scientist in that way. They highlight a lot of great value that you can add to just from your own computer. But this one might be especially valuable to us in this community. You can contribute to data on threatened or rare or data deficient or invasive species, without having to be there in person. And you can engage with broader people, and there's just lots of good that you can do. And so you may be thinking like, well, we have this volunteer base. This would have been really great activity during COVID or from some remote learning standpoint where you could come together online and then work together to help the community around you identify some of the biodiversity. But overall, there's a lot of different approaches. We talked about the trained approach or the mass participation. There's a lot of different ways that you could be engaging more people in your own gardens to think more critically about what they're seeing and to add some observations to broader research projects and things like that. The next thing I'm going to highlight is just some different tools that you could be using. So we just talked a lot about iNaturalist, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it. But there's a number of other tools. So Nature's Notebook is a really incredible tool, and specifically if you're interested in climate change type phenology work where you're looking at the timing of bud bursts or something like that, there's a lot of great projects within Nature's Notebook kind of focused on that. Spotteron is another kind of mapping. It's similar to EdMaps, mapping uses biodiversity, and same with iSpot. They're all kind of different in the way that they work with the community. iSpot allows you to have like symbiotic relationships, so you're tagging multiple organisms in a single picture, kind of, and you can, link this pollinator to that flower, for example. And so each of these tools have their own kind of benefits and drawbacks. But the other thing to think about is the community that you're in and what tool that community is using the most. So we could talk more about that, but I did want to just spend a couple minutes telling you why, for us, we really like iNaturalist. Generally, we pick iNaturalist because it has a pretty good user base, and really we liked it because the data is all open and available to anyone. We also liked it because it has a really stable smartphone application, so we don't have to worry about updates every time your phone gets a new software, every time your phone updates. But the way it typically works is you just take photos with your phone and you share it on iNaturalist. And other people will help you confirm or deny whether you correctly identified that organism. And once you kind of have a community consensus, it's considered a research grade. Within this, we've effectively trained a computer to identify things with photos now as well. So iNaturalist created another app called Seek, which is super powerful and really useful for identifying biodiversity. And so you just hold your camera up to a plant or an insect, and it will throw you some suggestions based on the models that it's been able to train with the community feedback. So it's pretty cool to see that, you're not only just contributing to research and biodiversity monitoring, but you're also helping train, a tool that could be used in your garden as well. Within iNaturalist, there's a lot of flexibility. There's a couple different project types. The most simplified is this collection project. And so in this case, I've just said, I want you to collect every observation of Oregon ash within the Western US. It automatically creates a project with all the observations of Oregon ash. And so you could create a space for your garden or your arboreta in this, and you could say biodiversity of Hoyt Arboretum, and you draw the boundary of Hoyt Arboretum, and it automatically will collect all the observations shared within Hoyt Arboretum in one collection project. It's pretty neat. And then with that, you could do some even cooler stuff where you're competing or you're sharing or you're comparing with other gardens. So there's these umbrella projects that take multiple collection projects and allow you to compare different metrics like number of participants, number of observations, different species observed. And so the City Nature Challenge is a perfect example of that, where every year between, I think it's the last weeks of April and the first couple days of May, they do a bio blitz around the globe, and they ask individuals to add observations of any organism within that one weekend. And then you're kind of, as a city, you're kind of competing with other cities throughout the world to see who can document the most biodiversity in that one weekend. And so it'd be really fun to do that with all the gardens on this call, right? If we had kind of, hey, during this week, we're going to try and engage all of our communities to map biodiversity, and then we want to compare which gardens have the most biodiversity, or just compare like the different species in different gardens. Or there's a lot of neat things that you could do depending on what your own interests are. The third project type in iNaturalist is this project type called traditional. They're the traditional projects, and these are custom. They're like very customizable. You can create all the questions in the project. And so in this case, we created one about a tree disease or tree dieback issue in the Northwest. This western red cedar tree that I'll talk a bit about more in a minute. But the way we did this is you would join the project, and then when you add an observation of a red cedar to the project, it asks certain questions, like, is this tree a healthy tree or an unhealthy tree? Is this tree next to a road, or is it in the middle of a forest? Those kind of questions. So the way this works is you would add pictures in your garden on your phone with iNaturalist or your computer. You can also take pictures with your camera and then later add them via your browser, your internet browser. But it's certainly easy once you've done it a couple times on your phone. So you just add a couple of photos, you suggest an identification for that species. So in this case, I'm adding some bigleaf maples, but this case, we're adding a maple that has a disease called sooty bark disease. So I'm adding it to this project. So I tag a project, and when I do that, it asks me all these questions. So in summary, there's a lot of different tools. Really, they're open, they're available. They'd probably love to support you and work with you to integrate it into your garden and your community. Each one has a little bit different benefits and stability and things like that. But really something to think about is like, what is the community around you already using? But generally we love iNaturalist because it's open, it's flexible, it's all those custom, all those project types. It's got a great user community. It's very positive. There's lots of people already using it, and we know that it's going to last into the future. It's like really stable. So with iNaturalist, we've been focused on a tree health issue in the Forest Health Watch. And as we mentioned previously, we created this in 2020 with support from the USDA, and we still have some funding from the USDA to maintain this project. We're really grateful for that support. But we're even more grateful for the many community scientists that have helped shape this program and make it into something meaningful and useful. So within the Forest Health Watch, we've kind of worked on 3 different projects so far. And I'm really just going to highlight this first one today, which is really focused on western red cedar and using iNaturalist to map the health of red cedar in the Northwest. So unfortunately, we've been seeing a lot of dieback in the species, which is at least on the west side of the state where I am and where Nina is. It's characterized by the tops of the tree dying, and many times that leads to complete mortality. And so unfortunately, we see this throughout the range, and there's been some questions about what is driving this, but there's also been some answers. But initially, when we started, we asked our stakeholders and partners, what should we focus on? What should we engage communities in? What's the greatest concern? And western red cedar dieback was the biggest concern for all of our partners. So it's the first project we launched in the Forest Health Watch. Since then, this is from just this year, a colleague of mine did a nice chronology study where they cored trees and they looked at tree ring growth in relation to climate, in relation to drought stress. And they found, this dieback issue is largely driven by consecutive longer and hotter summer droughts. And that's kind of an issue that the Northwest of the US is faced with, because we're used to having droughts, but they seem to be getting longer and hotter. And so depending on where you are, that signal might look a little different. But now that we know that red cedar is likely feeling the heat of these droughts, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of explore some specific hypotheses and dive into that deeper. So after in 2020, when we first decided this is the focus, we are really grateful to work with a number of partners from state agencies and federal agencies to design this iNaturalist project. So these three individuals were really generous, and they were already kind of tracking this in their own agencies, and they worked with us to create this iNaturalist project that's open to the public, but also asks the same kind of questions that they're asking and they're looking for. And this is a little bit, maybe a couple months old, but so far we've had around 300 people share observations, but almost about 700 people have joined this project and are interested in it. And we do, another thing that's neat about iNaturalist is you can take this open data and you can integrate it into other software or other apps. And so in this case, we've created a dashboard in Tableau Public. And so there's some neat ways to kind of see this update every day. And this is available on our website, foresthealth.org. Similarly, we created one with the health metrics. And so you can kind of click on these and see where all the trees have been shared and where all the unhealthy trees have been shared. So these are all the trees with dead tops, right? So similar to that photo I showed you, those series of photos, we're seeing this dieback throughout the range. More recently, with Nina's help, and something that we're really excited about at the moment is we've started to look at the red cedar trees from that data set, from the iNaturalist data set that are in the urban areas. And we're interested in testing a hypothesis about the link with urban heat. And so between Seattle and Tacoma, this photo is Tacoma, and Portland, there's these great heat maps from urban air temperature mapping campaigns. And we're able to extract that data and explore, this hypothesis of whether we hypothesize that the trees in the hotter areas and heat islands are going to be less healthy than trees in the cooler areas. And this has been a really fun opportunity to work with Nina and to explore this hypothesis and the capacity to leverage community science to address these questions. And so at this stage, we're going to hear from Nina on what that looks like from Hoyt Arboretum's perspective. So go ahead, Nina. I hope I left you enough time.
Thanks so much, Joey. Thanks for giving us a great introduction and overview of community science and how the Forest Health Watch is making a difference up here in the Northwest. So hey everybody, my name is Nina Avila and I'm the Education Programs Director for Hoyt Arboretum Friends. I want to tell you a little bit about Hoyt Arboretum first, just to give you a little background information. So you can picture it. We are a space of about 189 acres. We became an arboretum in 1928, and we have 12 miles of hiking trails. So along our hiking trails, you'll find over 2,200 different species of trees from 6 different continents across the United States. Across the world. We have a global tree collection, and 67 of those are endangered species. So I work for Hoyt Arboretum Friends, and we're the nonprofit that brings trees and people together. We do a lot of the people-y things at Hoyt Arboretum. We manage the volunteer services. We manage our visitor center. We have a membership program, and we have lots of great education programs. So we do the people-y stuff, and we work in partnership with Portland Parks and Recreation to take care of the tree collection and the trails. And we're a free open park. This is it's a little different than a lot of you out there that might be at a botanical garden that has an admission. We're free, we're open all the time, so we get lots and lots of visitors at our space. And this is one of our clear days in Portland. The picture behind the words, you can see a picture of St. Helens, and I believe that's Rainier in the background behind it. So we do have clear days in Portland. Today's actually a beautiful clear day. So how did Hoyt Arboretum and Joey and the Western Red Cedar Dieback, how did we get together? Well, in 2021, there was a group of dedicated volunteers at the Arboretum that were, like Joey said, they were part of this cohort that was trained. They were trained with staff at the Arboretum and with Joey on the Western Red Cedar Dieback project. So really understanding what's happening to the trees and what does that look like. And then what they were doing was monitoring the trees just at Hoyt Arboretum on our property, so within the 189 acres. And they've been doing that on an annual basis since 2021. That's a picture of one of my favorite Western Red Cedars at the Arboretum. Yeah, and then in 2022, like as Emily introduced, we became part of the PLACCE program, the cohort. Hi to all of my cohort friends out there. We had an opportunity to submit a proposal, and my particular proposal was about middle schoolers and climate change education. There was a gap in our programming at the Arboretum in middle school education, and it was also, I was understanding that it's kind of a great time to really start talking to students about climate change. And what better way to do that than with plants and trees? But we needed to have a focus, and if you're ready for a tree pun, a tremendous connection was made. The Arboretum, oh, let me go back. The Arboretum chose the Western Red Cedar as the forest companion with as a focus with the middle school students. So Joey and I started talking. I needed to learn more about his project and Western Red Cedars. And through our conversations, this big question came up that he mentioned earlier. Is there a correlation between Western Red Cedar tree health and hotter spots, the temperatures in Portland, cooler areas, hotter areas? Where are we seeing a decline in Western Red Cedar tree health? So Joey was like, hey, can you get some volunteers to help us? We need more tree observations. So I said yes, which I tend to do before. If you know me, I say yes a lot, and then I try to figure things out afterwards. So that's what I did. We said yes. And Joey used the street tree inventory for Portland, Oregon. It's available. Portland Parks and Recreation has made this inventory, and he was able to select 100 Western Red Cedar trees with a 30 to 40 foot DBH or diameter breast height throughout Portland. So what we did to make this kind of easier to digest for all of our volunteers is we grouped it together in like 9 or 10 trees. So we had this complicated map, and then we had 7 dedicated volunteers and myself and a coworker. And we went out, and in the fall of last year, we made all these tree observations using iNaturalist as our platform. So like Joey showed earlier, we all had our phones, we were out there, we were able to select the Western Red Cedar Dieback project when we were making our observations and answer the questions that correlated to the health of the Western Red Cedars. So Joey was able to see all of our observations, and then he was also able to take a heat map of Portland. So I just wanted to give you an overview of like what that looks like. So I don't have a pointer, but the purple star is where Hoyt Arboretum is located. And Portland is divided by a river called the Willamette River. So you'll see that blue line kind of going north and south, and that divides the city into an east side and a west side. So Hoyt Arboretum's the star. We're on the west side of Portland, and we're in an area of blue. Blue means cooler temperatures. We are lucky enough to also be adjacent to Forest Park, which is like the largest urban park in the United States. And you can see where the tree canopy cover really makes a difference with the Arboretum and Forest Park. The areas, the areas that are really red are the hotter areas of Portland, and you can see they're kind of next to where the rivers are, that industrial area, and a lot of east side Portland has increased temperatures. So Joey ran some of his statistical magic, I like to say, because I don't know much about that. And he was able to start to understand and see a connection, see this correlation. So the map there that has all the little dots on it, you can see the cluster of dark purplish dots. That's where the Arboretum is. So that's where there are Western red cedars located and the temperatures are lower. The other dots are the other Western red cedars that we observed, and you can see the orange or lighter colors, and that's where the temperature is a little warmer in Portland. So the graph there in the corner shows that the probability of finding a Western red cedar that has that dead top on it, like the picture, increases in areas where it's hotter in Portland, where there's a higher afternoon temperature. You can see there's another graph there that kind of shows that the trees that were unhealthy and have the dieback are kind of skewing towards that end of higher temperatures. So it made sense. It's unfortunate that we're seeing this, but what it allows us to do is also like find areas of Portland where there are a lot of Western red cedars. Are these neighborhoods that we need to really pay attention to? What does it look like for these neighborhoods in the future? And yeah, Joey, did you want to add anything? Did I explain that okay?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, well done. I think if there's any questions, we're happy to go into it more, but just really thrilled to see this kind of engagement result in something that's useful and applicable, like for planning. Yeah, Terrell's got some. Well, let's come back to the questions, but happy to answer them. Thanks, Nina.
Yeah. Yep. There might be some statistical questions at the end. What I wanted to touch on before I throw it back to Joey is why community science? Why are we doing community science with middle schoolers, and what does this have to do with the climate crisis? When I reflect on it, I think about when I was growing up, and climate change was maybe a word that I had heard. It was starting, I even reflected on The Inconvenient Truth in the book by Al Gore, and I was like, when was that published? It was 2006. That's like the first time I remember hearing about climate change. But then, there was nothing much after that. Nowadays, our students that are in middle school, like it's different. It's a thing that they're hearing, that they're seeing, they're experiencing here in Portland. They're really like they're seeing these changes. They're experiencing them every year. So it's not something we have to be like, hey, this is a new idea and this could happen. We're coming at it from a different angle. We're like, you know what, we're in this. The climate is changing, and what's the future look like? Climate change is a really big, overwhelming topic for all of us. And then when you think about what's happening for middle schoolers, they have a lot going on in their lives. There's a lot of things they're trying to figure out, and climate change is just an even bigger topic. It can be really overwhelming. So community science seemed like a way to engage the students as something that they could participate in. It's like this form of activism. Activism seems like a scary word, but activism is just being active. It's participating in a change. It's participating in gathering data. So it's a small piece. It's something that they can, it's tangible, something that they can do and have have an impact, be making a difference. And if they're not doing it and they're like, oh, Miss Nina, this is not very interesting, I don't want to participate. At least what we're doing is we're planting a seed with the students. They've heard now of community science. They know what it is. And so maybe down the road when they're in a couple of years and they're doing a research project, they might remember the seed that we planted. Another thing I love about community science, of course, a lot of it's nature-based. and their students are outside making observations. They're tuning in to nature. They're tuning into things that are happening around them. And observation skills are something that we all need to practice. And it's such a valuable lesson and a skill set that students can use throughout their lives. And it takes practice. It takes practice. There's a lot happening in nature, and we often just like walk by it. It takes practice to slow down and to observe and to notice changes. And our hope is that we're connecting the students with nature through these observations and by being outside, by being physically next to these trees when they're observing. And the hope is that down the road, they're going to continue to build this nature connection and keep nature in front and foremost when they're making future decisions. Lastly, community science shows us that science is alive. Science is always changing. This is super exciting. It's not linear. It's not just like, I think about the scientific method, which is in my mind, it's pretty linear. But that's not really what science is. Science is about asking questions, getting people involved, having new questions that come up, having new ideas that are sparked, and new projects that come off of ones that we're working on. And it's more of like these cyclical ways of seeing things instead of linear. And that's really exciting. And I think that's something important that students know. Science isn't boring, and they should be scientists. So what's next is this spring, actually starting next week, we're going to be back with students. We're going to be engaging our middle schoolers. We're working with 4 different schools here in Portland through the PLACCE project, and we're going to bring them to the Arboretum. They're going to stand next to Western red cedars. They're not going to use iPhones, but they're going to have a piece of paper. It's going to have all the questions on there that we answered when we connected through iNaturalist on our phones. And they're going to make observations about the trees. What's healthy? What are we looking at? Are we seeing dieback at the top? Are we seeing yellowing? Are we seeing thinning? Are we seeing browning? They're going to make observations and determine if the trees are healthy or unhealthy. Also hoping to continue to work with Joey and collect more tree observations in Portland. We've got some dedicated volunteers and want to keep them busy and keep them engaged. Maybe there's younger trees, smaller trees that have a different DBH in Portland. Maybe there's a new correlation that we'll find, or maybe it'll continue to support what we're already finding. And Joey's been working with his team to build a storyboard. It'll be something that's available online where we can send students and our teachers and community members and our volunteers, and people can start to see the impact that they're making, which is also very important. If you're going to participate in projects like these, it's really great to know that you're not just like throwing numbers somewhere and they're going out into the universe, that they're actually being used. Scientists are using them, people are looking at them, and it's making a difference. So the storyboard is soon to come. And it'll be a great platform to share our work and what we're doing. And I think I'm going to throw it back to Joey to wrap it up before we take some questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'll try and wrap this up quickly so we have lots of time, because I see there's some great questions. Thanks for being so engaged with us. And thanks, Nina, for that awesome summary of the incredible place that you work in. It's such a special place. And there's so much cool opportunity now. There's questions about how to engage the students, and now you have this opportunity to compare the cool neighborhood or the cool forest of Hoyt with the hot urban settings and do some neat comparisons there with them. So the last few minutes, we just wanted to share some ideas of projects you could do in your own gardens or your arboreta. And if you're interested in this forest health angle, there is this network online called the Forest Health Citizen Science Community. And there's 29 different forest health related projects listed on that webpage. So check that out, see if there's anything that's nearby. If you're interested in climate change stuff, there's a ton of different active projects and tools. We mentioned Nature's Notebook. I'm going to show you a couple things about that shortly, but I want to highlight Project Budburst. It's also a phenology mapping tool where you could look at the timing of buds and compare it this year versus last year, or other areas. And so really looking at how climate is influencing the phenology of plants. I included Birds Connect Seattle, but Birds Connect in general has a lot of great opportunities to engage volunteers, and people love observing birds, and there's so much opportunity there. The reason I highlighted Seattle is because they have a specific project related to climate change, and it's really neat to think about how climate is affecting our bird populations. And Nina and I were just talking about a project on Tuesday where it'd be neat to compare bird communities in Western red cedar and try and understand how red cedar dieback is going to affect bird populations or bird communities. And then thinking about how Hoyt Arboretum is kind of like a little refuge of healthy red cedar for that bird community that prefers red cedar. The final tool is Kokoros. It's called Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And so, that's essentially, you could be collecting rain data, measuring rain in your gardens and including that so that we could predict precipitation and understand what's happening with precipitation a lot better. In terms of Nature's Notebook, there's a lot of, it's kind of like a naturalist where there's a ton of different projects. Quercus Quest, Flowers for Bats, Nectar Connectors, Red Bed Phenology projects. So there's some really neat, if you have some nerds that are super into red buds, there's some neat opportunities there. You could create projects too. But I did want to share, there's some neat, they have this vignette that shares like how the data they're using, how scientists are kind of leveraging this data to advance knowledge and understanding. So some of the papers that have come out have specifically talked about backyard and botanical garden. How there's a lot of rare species in these botanical gardens that are really important to document. This one's pretty neat. It's not just climate warming, artificial light is shifting phenology. So, some things that I wouldn't think about necessarily, but I encourage you to look at how that data is being used. One other possible project, we have a project with 3 cities in Washington where we've planted red cedar trees from 2 different seed zones as kind of a demonstration. And so we have red cedar planted from Oregon, so they're from seed zones in Oregon, and then we have red cedar planted from Washington, and we're comparing which ones are going to do better or grow faster in the longer and hotter conditions. This isn't necessarily related to climate change, but there's also a lot of opportunity to do community science related to invasive species. And we've shared a couple of studies about where and how you could engage community members in invasive species research or monitoring. And we also have a paper specifically about kind of engaging garden staff to collect some like valuable data in botanical gardens. So reflecting, Nina and I have been talking a lot about red cedar, and this study that we shared earlier does a great job illustrating that this is like our canary in a coal mine, if you will. It's the first tree to really feel the heat of climate change, it looks like. And so we encourage you to think about, what is that canary in your neighborhood, in your community, and is there an opportunity to engage with that community to understand it better? So today we shared 2 different approaches that we're using with community science to better understand what's happening with Western red cedar. One is the iNaturalist project that's just open to anyone, but then the other one is this more trained hypothesis testing project that Nina has led with the community garden, or with the Arboretum and the volunteers. So with that, we're pleased to be here and really appreciate you all joining us today. And we're totally here as a resource. If you have any questions or you're interested in applying some of the stuff we talked about, you feel free to reach out to either of us. And we also are happy to answer any questions you have now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joey and Nina. That was really exciting to hear about the work that you've been doing together. And I'm excited about some of the questions that have been coming in. So I'd love to have you respond to a few of those since we have a few minutes to go ahead and do that. We had a question. This one maybe, well, both of you, but maybe Nina might start. Someone was asking about the seventh graders' engagement and do they get engaged with the results in addition to the monitoring, and how does that work?
Yes, we so the results that I showed you, we're definitely going to be sharing that with them. So the way our model has been working with the seventh graders is we went into their classrooms in the fall and they had a field trip to the Arboretum in the fall. And during that period of time, we were really, I think there was a question too about that, like, what do you mean by the Western red cedar as a forest companion? What we were really trying to do is engage the students with this tree, right? So this is a native tree. It's a tree they're going to see all around Portland, we hope. And we want them, like, there's a power in being able to look at a tree and identify it and be like, oh, that's familiar. I know the name, or I can tell my friend the name of this tree. So that was really our goal, is that they really connect with the Western red cedar in the fall. And then this spring, what we're doing is we're going back to see the same students in their classroom. And then they're going to come back to the Arboretum again in the spring. So when we go to the classroom now, we have Joey's statistical magic. Now we can go back and say, like, hey, this has been a project that we're doing. This is what we're finding. And then when you come to the Arboretum for the field trip, you're going to practice. You're going to participate just like our volunteers did, just like our community scientists did. And you're going to get to, see how we got to these results. So they've connected with the tree, and we'll show them what we're finding and have them participate too.
Really great. Thank you. We had a few questions about the research design. And one question was, how did you pick the afternoon temperature as your predictor in your study?
That's a great question. So in all of the heat mapping campaigns, so they're done by, a lot of the bigger cities have these urban air temperature mapping campaigns. And I think they're done by, it's a branch in NOAA called the National Institute of Heat Health something. It's like NIHHIS, but so they've done it in a bunch of different cities, and we're grateful. We're really lucky to have it in 3 cities in the Northwest. And each of those is on a single day, they'll go and measure temperatures across the area and they'll model it, but they measure in the morning, the afternoon, the evening. And so we looked at all 3, and the afternoon was the best fit. So that's how we decided to choose afternoon in the models. We also looked at like an overall average, and that didn't fit nearly as well. So yeah, it was one thing that we did learn through this, is that it's afternoon heat that seems to be the best predictor of the top dieback or trees just generally being considered unhealthy. That's such a good question, and those, we do have a GitHub repository that goes through all of the details of doing that and the testing and things, and I'm happy to share that if anyone is interested. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There's also a question, did you take into account moisture, precipitation, disease, or other factors like that?
That's a great question. So in our naturalists, we definitely have a question that says, have you seen any other factors that might explain why this tree is unhealthy? And when you look at the 2,600 trees that have been shared, very few of them actually have an answer to that, or yes, there was, an injury on the tree or a fire scar, or in some cases there's insect holes, a lot of woodpecker activity. But no, it doesn't seem like across the board there's any relationship there or something that we need to look into. There's certainly, things happening, but it doesn't seem like that's explaining the entire phenomena across the range of red cedar that we're seeing. What was the first part of that question? So that was the insects of disease.
Sorry. Precipitation and moisture, they asked about.
Oh yeah, so with the cities, there's a bunch of different analyses we're trying to do with this. And, Nina said this is really important to give feedback. And we also are including some volunteers, some community scientists or volunteers in this. And sometimes they have more spatial analysis or GIS skills than even me. So it's pretty cool to have these other people involved. But with the entire data set, we are looking at climate variables like precipitation and temperature, as well as soils, and also like where it is on the landscape. Is it on the hill or on a slope or in a valley, or those kind of questions. But for the urban data we did with Nina, and specifically looking at urban trees, we just looked at urban heat, and we're also really interested in looking at some of the pollution data and things like that. But it's hard to find good data sets that exist across like multiple states even. So that's been a limiting factor there. Good questions. Yeah.
Thank you. We had a question about how can we combat urban heat island effect? And maybe you want to speak to some of the things that you're learning about urban trees and connections between some of those potential solutions.
Absolutely. I think that's why this is important. A couple things. The 100 trees that Nina and her group visited, most of them were really healthy still. So that is really good to know, that there's still a lot of big, old, giant, healthy trees in Portland, even in the hotter spots. But we did find a higher probability of unhealthy trees. So it remains to be, one thing we want to do now is like, okay, what can we do to keep these big trees healthy when we know they're vulnerable to heat and drought, right? What are some things? So we're trying to figure that out. But yeah, there's enormous need to plant more trees and, equitably enhance our urban forests so that it's not, there's not so much disparity in the services of urban trees. But it's really critical that we plant the right tree in the right place. And I think from this, we're kind of learning red cedar might not be the right tree, which is sad, to be honest. It's like tragic because it's a really important tree culturally and environmentally, as the bird, I mentioned the birds, but yeah, we gotta do something soon. And so that's why this kind of information is valuable, I think, is if we're going to plant trees to combat urban heat islands or mitigate urban heat islands, which species are going to do well in those hotter areas? Good question.
Yeah, thank you. We had a question that was maybe platform specific. Somebody was asking about the difference between using something like Picture This versus iNaturalist. Do you have experience with both of those and can speak to that?
I don't know Picture This. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that.
Okay. Maybe. Nina, have you used that one? No? Okay. Maybe the person can reframe their question or tell us what it's like, and we'll see.
Sorry about that.
The plant ID.
Oh,
so maybe it would be
okay.
one where you would, use like the picture and having it ID.
I think, I'm not really sure which of those is better. Seek. What's nice about Seek is it's free, and some of those others maybe, I think your iPhone now has built-in technology to do this as well. So it's kind of up to you. That might be a great activity for some youth. Let's figure out which of these is the most accurate. And when you know the species ID, and a botanical garden is probably the best place to try that because there's so much diversity there. So that's a good question. For us, we've been really impressed with Seek. Like even for weird insects, it somehow can do it. But yeah, sometimes you can't always trust it. I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And we have just a couple minutes left, so I will kind of end with a final question. Maybe both of you can respond to. You've given us such cool examples of community science work that you've been engaged in, and I'm curious if you have thoughts about what you hope to do in the future with community science.
Well, it's when we do this and when we engage volunteers, we learn so much, and there's so many more. They have great ideas. So, I think we're really interested in this red cedar story. And I mentioned Jim early on, and he this past spring was like, "Hey, I want to know if the trees that have more browning right now um, are the trees that had less water last summer when I added them." So we were able to do a follow-up project based on the observations that he had, and so that's really fun. I love to learn that. But typically, we try and do stuff that has community needs. So we're trying to assess, what is the next big question, what is the next issue that we should be aware of, um, and is it feasible to do anything meaningful towards that with community science? But yeah, I think there's a lot of questions within the red cedar. We know it's vulnerable now. How can we help it? What can we do for our big, large trees right now? Is there something that we should be doing in Hoyt to make sure that they stay nice and big and healthy? And then two, if we're going to replant red cedar because it's so culturally important, can we plant trees from further south? Or, can we breed some drought tolerant version of red cedar? I'm not sure. Like those are kind of next steps with that species. Yeah. We'd also love to do a seed collection project
Ooh,
where we leverage the community scientists to collect seed, and then we can store the seed and conserve that genetics, or grow that tree if it's a good candidate for replanting other places. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. How about you, Nina? Any thoughts on future hosts for how you might like to engage with community science and the work that you do?
Yeah, I think Joey's always got a lot of great ideas. So, I think what I'm most excited about and can see in the future is I hope there's one of our students that asks a really powerful question this spring, and maybe that leads us into a different direction for next year. We're hoping to continue our pilot project from PLACCE. We're hoping to continue it into the coming school years. But yeah, maybe it's not always Western red cedar focused. Maybe there's another question that's coming up, or I'd love students to be more engaged in their local school neighborhoods, getting teachers involved, making it more part of their curriculum. So I'd really love to just keep engaging students and teachers and seeing where it goes kind of organically. But yeah, with the Western red cedar, like Joey said too, there's a lot more to go from there, from where we're at right now.
Yeah, thanks. Lots of possibilities. And yeah, the more we learn, the more questions we have, of course. So always new things to explore. Want to say thank you so much to both of you for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to our participants who came and had such great questions and really engaged with us throughout this program. Thanks so much for being here.